It's eyes in, hands out.
Hello, I'm Shirley Kavanagh, and you're very welcome to the Leadership Discoveries podcast, where leaders and experts from across sectors share insights, turning points, and hard-won wisdom that can drive real leadership impact. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Terri Moloney. Terri is a chartered director and a highly experienced business leader whose career has crossed sectors, geographies, and functions, and her career path has included roles in people and culture, strategy, operations, governance, and sales leadership with organisations including Kerry Group, Boston Scientific and Salesforce. Terri, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Shirley. It's great to be here.
I am delighted to be talking to you and thank you so much. I was really looking forward to this conversation. Terri, I gave you an introduction there. I'm sure it didn't do justice to your career in many ways, but you have crossed sectors, you have crossed functions. If there was a common thread that connected these different chapters of your leadership journey, what would it be, would you say?
Well, I think, when I look back, there's a couple of things. I think the first one is about building something and going into organizations where there's opportunity for growth and building something new. But also, I think the other important thing that has been for me and something which I've actively sought out really is about an organization where the values really show up on a day-to-day basis. I've always really been drawn to roles where there's a chance to connect those values to the strategy, and the real experience of actually the people doing the work. So for me, I think it's the two big things are around being able to build something, being able to grow with an organization and grow an organization, and to do that with a very strong values agenda.
And can I just ask you about that values piece, Terri, because we know values can often be corporate art. And I always remember doing some work with a client a long, long time ago. And one of the first things you did was put the values up on the wall and asked the cohort of leaders to identify their values. We'd put up around about 10 different sets of values, and they weren't entirely coherent, let's say, in picking out their values. So have you seen it work very well where values are really embedded? And what needs to happen for that to happen?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate, and I think organisations that I've joined had already started that journey. A lot of them, and then other organisations I've been involved with. I was part of the beginning of that journey. So it's really interesting because an organisation that has a very strong values bias really starts off in terms of how the organization behaves and how people in the organization behaves. And probably a better way to describe values is actually behaviors in an organization. And it's how I help organizations now to kind of identify what we mean as an organization by values. So values absolutely doesn't work if it's just a picture on the wall and there's 10 of them and no one can remember them. Where values really works is where they inform every conversation, they inform all the decision making. So if you're making a decision, and probably an example is probably a good one to give you for illustration, in Salesforce, my most recent organization as an executive, trust was our number one value. And I think we led everything with trust. A HR example is that, a member of staff came to me, a new member of staff came into me and asked me about the sick pay policy. She'd come from an organization where, there had been very kind of, strong policies and procedures, very, very well organized organization. And we didn't have a sick pay policy because really at the end of the day, what's the purpose of a policy? It's for compliance. Whereas in Salesforce, we trust employees. And so we trust them if they're unwell and unable to come to work. We believe them, we trust them. So again, their role from a HR perspective was to understand the issue, not to apply the policy. And that's, I think, is leading with trust. So it's actually a very different way of operating, but it works. And I think any organization I've worked in, right back from the very start of my organization with the Hospitaller Order of St. John of God, very values driven organization. I think that's where I probably learned my trade, I suppose, so to speak, and how I grew up in that values environment and why they continue to be so important to me. But if they're on a wall and they're not lived every day, you're wasting your time. Yeah, it's an expensive marketing exercise.
Absolutely. Can I just ask you about HR? Because you've been very fortunate where you've been at that intersection of the commercial aspect of organizations as well as the people aspect, leading out on those. And, I'm always interested in perceptions of the HR world at the moment. Can you just tell me, in your view, like what does really good HR look like now in an organisation? And if I can ask you two questions, which is bad in one, just again, being able to bring that commercial lens. Are HR folks doing enough of that? Do you know what I mean?
No, is the short answer. The HR people are not doing enough of that. I remember a piece of advice I got when I joined Kerry was from the factory manager there. He said, you need to walk the floor every day. You need to be out there. You need to see the organization and understand how the organization works. You know, Kerry was an amazing organization for measuring impact, measuring results. Everything had a measurement attached to it. But that kind of belied, I suppose, how the work happened every day. So on the one hand, everything was measured and measurements were king. But on the other hand, behaviors and, working in the FMCG sector, you can't take chances with food.
Yeah.
So it actually was the behavior of people in terms of making sure the quality was right, making sure that if there was a mistake or an error, like all those things were so important. But the walking the factory floor, understanding the business really stood to me in that organization, because when I went into the leadership meetings then and people talking about challenges in production or challenges in finance, I knew what they meant and I knew how to support the organization from a people perspective within that context. And very often, I think HR falls into the kind of, I suppose, the trap of become, very operational and very busy doing things, policies and procedures and, managing people, which, is absolutely abhorrent to me. HR do not manage people. People managers manage people. But I think the commercial understanding your business, and again in Hilti, I moved into sales to really understand the business. It was a commercial sales organization essentially. Understand the business that you're supporting, because without that, you're making the wrong decisions. I think today HR has moved from being that, HR operations role, which was very strong in compliance and all that good stuff and still needs to happen. But I think AI and, systems and all of that good stuff, they're more and more taking the burden of that work away. And what that does, it allows people in the HR profession to really partner with the business, understand the business, and be involved in all of the decisions, not just the people decisions, around how the business can be successful. Because HR people have such a depth of knowledge about the business, about people, and they can have a really unique perspective. So for me, if you're a HR professional and you don't know your business, you're on hiding to nothing. You really need to step out there. You need to understand the business. You need to understand the finance. You need to understand, the core function of the organization, whether that's sales or marketing or manufacturing, and just know it. And it's just, for me, it's not negotiable.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with everything you're saying. I mean, there's one line there that hit me: people, managers manage people. And, I think that's really, really important because there is a responsibility on the line to manage effectively. And I hear what you're saying. There's a responsibility on HR folk to understand the business, understand the metrics, understand the commercial drivers, essentially, to help that.
Understand their role, Shirley, in supporting the people manager, not the people.
Yes.
The manager's job is to know his people, his or her people, to support them, to seek advice where they need to seek advice from, and to direct them in the right direction, to systems and processes that can support their whatever they're in, their development or their queries. But HR's role is to support that manager or that leader.
Yeah.
Not to get bogged down into sorting out a mistake on somebody's payslip or a query around a benefit or anything like that. There's that's just, it's not adding any value to the business.
Yeah.
And HR, like every other person in the business, has to add value.
Absolutely. You mentioned Salesforce just a little bit earlier on there, and you were in Salesforce at a significant period of growth in Ireland. And scaling up is always a challenge for organizations, I think, and some do it very well and some don't not so well. What did scaling up teach you in terms of leadership, and what can it teach others versus a steady state organization, let's say?
Yeah, I've never really worked in a steady state organization. I don't think
Yeah.
this thing, they're either going up or they're going down.
Yeah.
But I think scaling, and Salesforce particularly, I think scaling taught me that leadership in a scaling organization is about clarity, first and foremost. So it's about helping everyone understand what's going on. It's about prioritization, because when you're scaling, everything's moving so fast, and you have to be able to prioritize what's important now. And then resilience, because change is scaling and change are literally the same sides, as the one coin. So I think, I think three things, clarity about what's happening and where we're going, prioritization in terms of what we need to do now, and resilience in terms of being able to be agile and adapt and so on. But it's also then fundamentally, if I bring you back sort of to my values piece, it's about those core values. While everything else is growing and changing and perhaps in chaos, maintaining those core values in every decision. It's very easy for behaviors to drift, and but so if you're not intentional, and I think being intentional around the values first, it just makes it much easier. Again, it goes back to that, being a decision-making tool rather than just a poster on the wall.
Yeah, I'm really interested in, this lens that you have through values and values-based leadership as such. And actually, I was just conscious when I asked that question. I said, scale up versus steady state. I don't know. You're right. Is any organization in a steady state at the moment with the way the world is? But no, I don't think so either. But can I just take values again? If I could just sort of dig into that a little bit deeper, because sometimes I hear organizations say, I think we need a values refresh. I think we need to look at the values. What's your thought around that?
Well, my first question to them is, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What's wrong? What are you trying to fix? And it's very often, transformation or something hasn't worked. And so they think, oh, our values are wrong. Or actually, sometimes it's not even, they just go into compliance and they go into, trying to push the agenda without really understanding what's wrong. And I think values really gives people an anchor. I think, it is, like in Salesforce, trust was number one. If we say that you value trust, then you have to show that and live that and be part of everything. But in transformation, I think, which is a lot of organizations are going, where I suppose people struggle with values, in transformation, it's not something, and it's not an abstract kind of start of the presentation. It's actually, it's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
I think, leaders have to be engaged. Again, if I go back to sort of another organization I'm working with at the moment, RTÉ have revisited their values as an organization. They have built them from the ground up, working with the whole organization, and have gone from, potentially a page on the wall to something now that is part of every decision at the board, every decision at executive, courage, accountability, and transparency. It is how we live. Any initiative, any program, any transformation, are we having courage? Are we, being transparent? These are the questions we constantly ask ourselves. And I think that's how strategy and values lives together.
Yeah. It sounds like you've kind of almost put it into the system, that it's kind of part of the process almost, which is.
They're part and parcel. They're not separate. Yeah. Like when somebody says we need to refresh our values, when you're refreshing the organization, what are you doing really? It's not a question of taking this piece of work to one side, doing something nice, creating a lovely new, phrase or whatever, and then, issuing it out. There's no context for people. There's no reason really.
Yeah.
What is it that you're trying to do? And sometimes it is values, sometimes it is those behaviors in an organization that aren't embedded across the whole organization. If there are obstacles to things, what's going on in that particular part of the organization. So it really is being forensic and going deep into the organization to understand what's happening. Some of that might be, behaviors and values. Others might be systems and processes that are broken.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it may not be a values issue at all. It may be that people simply can't implement what you're trying to do for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you mentioned transformation there as well, and I know we've talked about transformation a little bit, but transformation can be painful for organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of your own experience about what do leaders really need to be doing through that period of transformation?
Yeah, I think transformation, senior leaders have to be visibly bought in. They have to be engaged, and they have to tell the story over and over and over and over again, why we're doing it, what it is we're doing, what it means, what will happen, what it means for you, what it means for me, and then, how as things start to move along, demonstrating that, through those decisions and actions and changes, that the values still apply. Even when things are moving quickly and there are trade-offs, and there'll always be trade-offs in transformation. But if you keep going back and saying why and why now and what it means every day, every week, every month, it's absolutely critical, because people, in a larger, any size of an organization, when you tell people the first time, they hear a certain amount. When you tell them again, they might hear more or something different. And, having that open dialogue in the organization, allowing questions, really helping people understand what's going on and why and how it
Mm,
affects them. So for me, that's what transformation is.
yeah.
You can decide on a journey, but if you haven't got people with you and bought in and knowing what the outcome for them is, you're not going to be successful.
No. And you mentioned just a little earlier on, you mentioned RTÉ, the broadcasting, public sector broadcasting organisation. So that's an organisation with significant public relevance. It's highly visible, the role. It's a complex organisation, a complex environment, and sometimes contested because there's a lot of focus on it. So when you look at that in that type of environment, what is it drawing on in terms of your leadership capability as such? What do you really need to sort of tap into?
I think I'm on two state boards at the moment: RTE, which is Public Service Media, and then Enterprise Ireland, which is supporting small and medium-sized enterprises. And because, there are organisations that are in the public domain, that, where media, regulators, communities all have a stake. I think, how you live the organisation's values is very visible and often tested, and I think for me that requires really strong governance, transparent decision making. So absolutely transparency in terms of why particular decisions were made, and a deep respect for due process. Because the process of coming to a decision in an organization like that has so many stakeholders. The process of actually making sure that you're engaging with stakeholders, that, you're being honest to your organizational values, that you're understanding your remit as a state organization, are all critical. So you have to be able to explain not only why the decision was taken, but how that decision came to be, and what the organization's mandates are, and whose interests were considered, and so on. And I think, when I go back to RTE and Enterprise Ireland, I think things around courage, around being able to operate in that environment where there are so many perspectives and views. And I think, the values of the organizations really give you that compass, to stay grounded, to listen to legitimate concerns, to make decisions that you can stand over, and made consistently with the values of the organization, which,
Hmm.
invariably is around transparency, because of the public mandate that both organizations have.
What made you want to be part of those boards, quite frankly? Because, some might say you could have an easier life. So what is it that drove you forward for those?
I think, there's a certain an element of Ireland Inc. In my
Hmm.
my own value system. Every organization I've worked in, has had a strong presence in Ireland and has made a significant contribution in Ireland. And I think that's what I've really enjoyed. Both Enterprise Ireland, I think Enterprise Ireland in the first place, I think was, an organization where I could see, having worked in FDI and foreign direct investment, I could see the need to, and the government policy, and indeed, of growing our small and medium businesses to be able to be as equal a contributor to the economy as foreign direct investment. And Enterprise Ireland, that's essentially their mandate.
Mm.
And I thought that was really interesting. And so again, looked at the organization, looked at the values of the organization and their mandate, and was just so drawn to it, to how can we make the Irish businesses so successful. I mean, it was just like, it's amazing. It's a privilege to be part of that work. RTE, I think, I joined at a period of a lot of change in the organization and a lot of controversy. And again, because I'd like everyone else in Ireland, and probably around the world, we, following the media, seeing hearing what was going on. And I could see an organization that was struggling sort of with direction and with its values, and, culture, and the organization culture. I could see personally, was something that perhaps hadn't been given the attention that it needed. And I was really keen, again, with the Ireland Inc. hat on, and such a strong mandate for Ireland, for RTÉ has in public service broadcasting. I felt I could help, and so that's really what I went in, is I may be able to help. So I was really happy and surprised, I suppose, when I was selected for the role, because I have no background in media. But I think the team that are there, the executive team and the board now, they're just such a strong group of leaders from all very different backgrounds, and with that compass, that very strong compass that the executive team in RTÉ have now developed with their strategy. It just keeps us aligned. And again, the values work that they've done as well. They've done so much work over the last couple of years to really turn the organization into something that is so impressive. I've been blown away by the work done at RTÉ, and they don't get a whole lot of credit, I suppose, for all the good work they've done. But it's just been an absolute privilege to be part of that journey with them. But I think I went in sort of with that culture hat on, thinking maybe I can help, having come up through many organizations with great examples of how culture really can impact the organization.
And I can hear that values piece coming through all of that, Terri. I have to say, in terms of your motivation for joining those organisations, and a great testament to your colleagues there in both of those organisations as well, in terms of the great work that they do. You embody very much the concept of the third chapter, where you're bringing everything together. And I know you've mentioned a number of different things. So what does your life look like at the moment? What is it you spend your time doing?
So I think that's probably two pieces of it. On the work side, I think it's moving from working from in organizations and the operational rigor and demands that goes with that, to actually being able to stand back and look at an organization from the outside, and from an oversight perspective, and from an organizational direction perspective, strategy and so on. I think look at how where my learnings and the learnings of the other members of the boards can help inform that organization about moving forward even faster and even better. So I think, in this third chapter, I'm left about sort of progression, and I'm really more about focused on choosing work that aligns with my own values, and also around public purpose. Because I've gotten so much from Ireland Inc. Myself, as my career, my education. I've been a huge beneficiary of everything that sort of Ireland has provided, and I think it's a way to give back in that respect. So I think the other side of it, then, on the personal side, I've slowed down a lot. My husband and I both enjoy slow mornings.
Lovely.
Nothing nicer than getting up and not having to rush out the door, being able to have a cup of coffee and check the papers and things like that in the morning, without sort of checking the emails and all of the things that goes with an executive career. Yeah, we travel a little bit as well, which is lovely. And it's just, it's really the combination of those two things, being able to still contribute, but at a different level in an organization, and having the flexibility and freedom of not a full-time, I suppose,
Yeah.
which is great.
It sounds super, I have to say. I'm sure there's a lot of people who'll be listening to this and saying, I love the sound of that. Just one thing that I'd love your view on, which is just that step up into a board position. I'm conscious there were people who are currently studying for and taking various qualifications with a view to taking on a board role. Can you just tell those people what's different about being at board level? What can you do and what can you not do? What would your advice be?
So a very wise chair of the ARC in UCC had said to me when I joined, there was my first kind of governance role, had said to me, Terri, it's eyes in, hands out.
Great phrase.
So you can't really, your tendency when you move from an executive career is to move into solution mode and get stuff done. I mean, that's what we're all trained over 20 years plus to do. Find a solution and get it done. And I'm particularly in Ireland, I think, we have a great reputation of getting things done. But I think at the non-executive role or advisory role, it's very much about asking questions, not providing solutions, because you're not part of the executive. You're not there to run the organization. You're there to provide oversight into the good running of the organization. So I think it is different. It is hard to make that transition, because inside you're screaming that why don't you just do it? Why don't you just move on? Why don't you just do this? but that may not be right for that organization, and you don't know, like, you don't know where that organization is, and every organization is different. So it is really about assessing, asking questions, and helping leaders really reach the right solution themselves. It's almost coaching and mentoring. I mean, that's almost what it is, but
Yeah.
with a very strong governance lens on it, because at the end of the day, and particularly in state boards and in any organization, you're responsible for the shareholder fund, you're responsible for government money, and you can't take that responsibility lightly. You have to ensure that things are done correctly, legally, transparently, and with the right direction in mind, that you're aiming for the right things, is being followed and so on. So it's different. It's much more enjoyable because you can walk away at the end of the day and not have to worry about, oh, I have to send 40 emails, or I have to do a project on, or I have to do that research, because that's the job of the executive. So there's no carrying the work home in the same way that there is as an executive. I'm sorry, I'm making it sound probably amazing, and everyone will want to leave executive work and move into non-executive work, because it is fantastic. But so it's different. I have to say the training I did with the IOD was superb, and a lot of what they do is helping you understand the difference between executive and non-executive work, in terms of how you read financial reports, how you look at leadership, how you look at other operational issues. So as well as sort of the governance and risk element of it, there's a mindset shift that they help you navigate. And I'd encourage anyone to do some governance training if you're thinking of moving into this world, because you need to understand the risk of joining a board, because there is a risk, a professional risk and a personal risk in some cases with private boards. But how do you navigate that execution and governance piece, because you're not in execution anymore.
So a very clear demarcation of roles I'm hearing in relation to
completely.
this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. That was a good way. My long story got there.
No, brilliant. AI and our world at the moment, and technology, and all of the challenges that we face at the moment. Where is your head in relation to technology in organizations, AI? It's a big question, and I'm asking you to answer it whichever way you want to, and particularly for leaders.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by AI, I have to say, and not just because I spent 7 years in a tech organization, but I think there's a lot of change happening at the moment in organizations. AI is one element of it, but hybrid work, stakeholder scrutiny, constant transformation. I mean, we started off the conversation talking about how organizations are just in constant state of change. So I think leaders need to be both commercially sharp, both including HR people, and values anchored. I think the values piece of it will always guide you, even if you're thinking about AI. Again, start with your values. What is it that you're trying to achieve with your AI? I do think AI is moving slower, I think, than I thought it would, particularly in commercial organizations. But I think, there are some very strong values-led AI companies out there. And I think they're the ones, if you're going to do some work in that environment, I think they're the ones you need to look at. But I think, asking questions about the technology, what it does, I think AI will bring us a new way of working. I don't think it's going to cause, I know there were reports around job losses in AI, but actually I think AI will save us time to do more value-added things in the organization. And I think as leaders, particularly, systems and processes that can be managed through AI, through agentic AI, which is repeatable, it will just save us time from that drudge work, I suppose, at the end of the day, like things like signing off sick leave. And, one of the things we talked about earlier in the conversation was managers' role in managing people. And I think very often managers get caught up in so much admin work and so much paperwork and tracking and measuring and things like that. I think AI is just going to be a godsend to that type of an organization, where it can actually free managers up by putting a lot of these routine tasks through AI, generating reports and so on, to enable managers, particularly people managers, to get to know their teams more, to spend more time with their teams, developing them and helping them be more successful. So for me, AI, I think on balance is a good thing. Obviously, it needs to be done with good governance. And I think, if you are looking at a big system introduction with AI, I think you need to do it with an organization that's values led and has trust and fairness and so on, is inclusive all those good all those good things. But I think, I'm excited about it.
Hmm.
I think there is absolutely a danger of it, of people becoming kind of very reliant on AI, particularly like, losing some level of engagement with customers by, by letting AI do more than it should with customers. I think the person is going to be center to all of this, but how AI helps the person, as in, the salesperson or the leader, be more customer focused and more commercial, I think
Hmm.
is what I hope for,
Yeah.
and certainly what I would be driving in organizations that are looking at it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Terry, because it can be easy to get a sort of see tech through rose-colored glasses and get quite excited about what it can do, more than how it's actually going to help us and our customers. And it's almost stepping back, isn't it, to go forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every conversation needs to say, well, what are our values? How does this help our customers or our
Yeah.
clients or our stakeholders? So how does it impact them? How does it help them? Is there a risk that it might damage them or alienate them as well? I mean,
Hmm.
because some parts of business are still very, very important to have the person.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm struck when I think about technology and even just this part of this conversation, and that often we can see digital divides happening, be it at a social level, gender-based level, or whatever. But I'm curious, just in your view around multi-generational type workforces, where often we have sort of millennials and even beyond. I think it's the beta generation. I can't remember which, but anyway,
Lost track of all the letters.
who use technology differently or use it more frequently or whatever it is. Is there any advice you'd give to people who are managers who are working in that multi-generational workforce? Because I hear it a lot. These young people, they expect this, they expect that, and they're different in the workplace. Is there something that is, look, just from your view, look, these are just some of the things you need to do? Because we are working in multi-generational workforces as they extend and lifespans get longer and all sorts of things.
I think a multi-generational workforce actually has massive opportunity for change, for innovation, for transformation. I think it's about including those voices. I do think there is an element of, I said one of the things we looked at another organization I was working in as an executive was from a benefits perspective, for example, and just use it as an example to kind of lead me to the next piece of the thing too. As a benefits program, would we segment our benefits to actually people's life stages? And I think that's sort of looking at employees like your customers almost.
Mm.
Actually looking at your employees like your customers, that's straightforward. What do they need now? And how can you provide the right solution for your employees to thrive and be successful? So in that regard, in relation to harnessing, I suppose, how they use technology, how they work, what their expectations are in terms of work-life balance or learning and development, promotion prospects, all of those good things. I think it is around almost stepping back and think them as a customer, because employees are customers, like just internal customers as opposed to external customers. And how do we support them? How do we give them what they need to enable them to thrive and be successful? And it may be different for different generations. It may be different for different regions and sectors and functions. But I think with AI, come back to that, moving sort of some of the drudge work away, you have time to think about these things.
Hmm.
And I do think, we're at a stage now where we should be customizing employee experience to suit employees and make them successful and thrive. We're not there yet. I don't know any organization doing that, but I think it's the future. Really
Okay.
understanding sort of individual, maybe not individual employees, depending on the scale of the organization, but certainly, grouping common needs and wants and wishes together and providing solutions for those. It's, I think, to retain people, to help them stay with the organization. I think that's really important, and that will change over time.
Hmm.
As people, I do believe your life stage is critical to how you kind of engage at work and how you perform at work. One of the things I looked at in organizations, people who are mobile versus not mobile, and people get hung up on that and say, oh, I'm not mobile, I never get promoted. But actually, you maybe not be mobile now, but there are stages in your life that you will be mobile. And it's understanding what you can do now in that non-mobile availability piece, and what you might do when you do become mobile.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, it's life stage, it's generation, it's understanding all of that good things that make each individual employee unique, and how do you harness that? So I would
Yeah.
love to see a world where we customize employee experience to the customer level, in the same way that we do for external customers who buy our products and services.
Yeah, really interesting, really important lens to have actually, and that looking at the career as a life stage piece rather than just here and maybe not now, but it doesn't mean not ever.
Whatever, exactly.
Yeah. Just my final question for you, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I have a whole load of other questions, but we can't spend all morning on this. When you look at leaders today, and to people who might be listening, what would you say to them in terms of the capabilities that they need to be developing? You know, that they need to really bring into organizations, whatever type of organization that is.
Yeah, so I suppose echoing a few of the points that I've already made, I think get curious about how your organization works, how value is created. If it's a commercial organization or a non-commercial organization, what's the value? What's the purpose of the organization? How is value for the client or customer or whatever created in your organization? And how values are lived. I think if the values aren't lived, and if they don't form part of every decision you ever make, or every conversation you have, in it doesn't not out loud necessarily, but if trust is a number one value in your organization, are you really leading with trust? Are you working with trust? Do you trust people? Like, do you trust them? And if not, why not? So I think get curious about the value, the commercial value of your organization, or in some non-commercial organizations, what's the purpose and value of your organization, and then how the values are lived. Then I think the next bit is the business model. So, how decisions are made in the organization. Is it, are you part of a multinational where, maybe decisions are centralized, or, do you have autonomy at a local level? And understand that and learn how to navigate that. I think if you know how to navigate an organization and influence how decisions are made, you'll most of all, you'll get a reputation for understanding the organization, for reliability, for being a decision maker, for being a leader. So I think, understanding that piece of it. And, I'm working with some FDI companies at the moment, subsidiary organizations, and very often they don't have the autonomy to make a decision in their local organization, that requires money, because money is managed centrally. So how can they influence up through the organization to get the necessary resources to add the value to the organization that they're working in? So it really is knowing the organization, knowing how the values work, knowing how the decisions are made, and all those good things. The other thing I would say to you is, say yes to everything.
Mhm.
But do so with your values in mind. So for me, having been grounded in a very strong values organization earlier in my career, any organization I went to, as part of my discovery with that organization and interview process and so on, I really sought to understand whether they really were a values organization, or whether they started the journey or were on the journey, or how it worked in that organization. And choose organizations that align with your values. If you're someone who likes, very fast progression and mobility and all those good things, look for those fast-paced organizations that you can achieve your goals. But say yes to things. I wandered around different functions. I say wander with inverted commas. I wandered around different functions in my career, but I always said yes to things, and I always, got curious about stuff, asked questions, and suddenly found myself doing things that I never really planned. I mean, working in Scotland in a sales leader role with a group of amazing account managers, visiting customers, that's something that I hadn't planned, but it was fantastic. So do those. The experiences that you get, sometimes they're not very comfortable, but actually they just help so much, and they'll give you such a rich learning experience that even if you step into them and step back, it is you will come away just a much better person, understanding your business, understanding your people, and knowing yourself more. I think that's the critical part. I think I could keep going. I mean, there's so many things I think that
Mm.
are important, but I think, yeah, for me, be commercial, get curious about how your organization works, and be true to your values. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. That's fantastic. It's super advice. And seize the day. That's what I'm hearing here, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely.
Yes. Carpe diem. That has been a really, really interesting conversation, Terry. Thank you so much for taking the time out to spend it with me, and I really appreciate it. Super, super advice. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. And I know for me, every conversation leaves me with something new to think about. So that you don't miss any of these episodes, you can subscribe to the Leadership Discoveries podcast. Do connect with me on LinkedIn or visit shirleykavanagh.com for more resources to help you reflect and support you in your own leadership journey. Until next time.